Hello and welcome to my channel if this is the first video of mine that you are watching, but if it is not, welcome back. Today, as you can tell by the title, I'm going to be talking about how I'm getting on with my spring TBR/MBR, and I do have a cat who is making biscuits in my lap right now, and she looks like she's gonna curl up and fall asleep. So if you see some fur flying and hear some purrs in the background, just know that there's a very content cat on my lap right now. I haven't read quite as much of my TBR/MBR as I would have liked, which is always the case with me, but you might be able to tell I sound a little bit nasally because I am at the tail end of a cold, but I have made my way through 5 of the books I had set out to read this quarter, and I did put another one on pause. So really quickly, I'm going to talk about the books on the TBR that are on pause. The first one is The Harp of Kings by Juliet Marillier, and you can see that I'm about halfway through this book here. However, it was at that point where I realized this series, this trilogy, it takes place chronologically after her Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy. So I'm in the midst of reading the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy now, and then I will pick up the first in the Warrior Bards series. But I'm really enjoying the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy. And in a very similar turn of events, I went to pick up The Wolf's Call by Anthony Ryan, and in his dedication, or in his forward, I think he thanks his agent for returning to the world of Valen, and that's when I dug a little bit deeper and realized that there is a duology, or there's a trilogy that predates this series here that talks about Valen's upbringing and what came before this book, obviously, what made him a warrior and what made him a living legend, whereas in this book we pick up with him being that living legend. So I think I'm going to order the first trilogy and read that before I pick up The Wolf's Call, just because I do really enjoy reading series in chronological order whenever possible. So I put a pause on this one. Thankfully, I realized this time before I dove into the book, but TBD on when I will get to The Wolf's Call, with just having to pick up another series before I read this one. Okay, so I am not sure how much of what just took place is going to end up in this video, but to summarize, I've been very anxious and nervous and trying to distract myself the last few hours because my sister-in-law was in the hospital giving birth, and I just found out that her and baby are happy and healthy and all is well. All went well and perfect. So I think I might be able to articulate my thoughts and feelings a little bit better. So I'm going to start over talking about The Black Company by Glen Cook. And I think my struggle to articulate my feelings about this book really does speak volumes because I'm so conflicted. I didn't really enjoy reading The Black Company, but I don't think that Cook intended for readers to enjoy this story or to enjoy these characters, because these characters aren't very likable. I went into this book thinking that it was going to be one of the best modern military fantasy books out there. But I think pioneering on the cover here is much more apt at describing that it was one of the first of its kind. It helped establish the genre, and Cook did something to fantasy, to military fantasy, that hadn't been done before. This was published in the 1980s. So in a lot of ways, it reads like a not great 1980s novel with the depiction of female characters within this book. I did think there was a gender fluid character at one point, but no, that was not the case. So the female characters in this book truly, really only exist to further along our male characters. And there's some really horrible, horrible things that happen to not just female women characters, but female children. And that's, I think, where I draw the line in what I find to be unpalatable in books. I would love to still be within an academic setting and reading this book because I think there's a lot to analyze. However, if you are not looking to analyze your books, if you're not looking to compare and contrast and try to draw out these grand metaphors and associations, I don't think this is necessary reading. I think there is a paragraph here that I have flagged that summarizes what Cook spends 275 pages writing about. So I'm going to read it out loud now. And it says, it's from the perspective of our main narrator character. You who come after me, scribbling these annals, by now realize that I shy off portraying the whole truth about our band of blackguards. You know that they are vicious, violent, and ignorant. They are complete barbarians, living out their cruelest fantasies. Their behavior tempered only by the presence of a few decent men. I do not often show that side because these men are my brethren, my family, and I was taught young not to speak ill of kin. The old lessons die hardest. And I think Cook does portray the humanity within soldiers well, but I also think if you have taken a history class within the last decade or 15, 20 years even, from a halfway decent teacher or professor, you already know that soldiers were human, that they had flaws, they had negative attributes. They were not always these golden heroes riding in on white horses. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from The Black Company. I did not finish this book having learned anything new. And I was really hoping, if nothing else, to come away from this book having new analysis to apply to more modern military fantasy books. And that unfortunately was not the case. My last point, I promise, before I move on to my next read, is that Cook was in the military or in the Navy, and I was trying to draw the parallels between our 20th century history of war and what was taking place in this book. And my partner actually made an amazing point in that Robert Jordan was a soldier during the Vietnam War, and he brought that lived wartime experience into the Wheel of Time. And he managed to do that without robbing female characters of their humanity in his attempt to show humanity during wartime, the good and bad and the ugly of humanity during war. Granted, Cook wrote a book that is only 275 pages long, and Jordan spent thousands and thousands of pages writing his allegories and the like with the 14-book Wheel of Time series that probably averages out at about at least 1,000 pages a book. So it's comparing apples to oranges a little bit, but I think that's a really important part when discussing the Black Company's impact on military fantasy. And Wheel of Time isn't military fantasy, but I think there are better examples, at least in the 21st century, that show the humanity of soldiers and the humanity of wartime and not just these heroes, while not robbing female characters of their humanity. And that's where I'll wrap things up for now about The Black Company. The next book that I have to talk about off of my spring TBR was a 5-star read, and one that absolutely depicts the humanity of both men and women during times of trauma and stress and hardship, and that is Tower of Thorns by Juliet Marillier. And as you can tell, I started tabbing not right away, about 30-40 pages into this book, I was like, you know what? No, I need to not fully annotate this book, but I definitely wanted to mark some passages. This was a 5-star read. This is one of the best reads of 2025 so far for me. It is the second book in a trilogy, so I can't talk too much about it, but the first book in this trilogy, we are learning more about Blackthorn's history and what took place and what happened in her past that has left her so scarred and brought her to the present day where she meets Grimm and embarks on a journey of sorts. Blackthorn's book was the first one. This second book was Grimm's, and both books, the first and the second book in this series, broke me. I have said before, and I'll say again, that I just want Blackthorn and Grimm to be happy and healthy and warm and safe and happy. I adore these two characters so much. Marillier depicts such realistic characters. They have experienced such hardship, such trauma, and they are still going through it. I don't often love rape depicted in my fantasy novels, as I have spoken about before, and I don't think that is a controversial take, but the reason that I don't enjoy sexual assault as a plot device in fantasy books is because so often it's glossed over. It's not appropriately taking the time to depict the trauma that follows. Marillier does this. Our characters are 10, 13 years after their worst days, their worst moments in their life. They have not had the time to work through that trauma, and therefore they are still going through it every single day. Blackthorn is a more angry character. That is how her grief and trauma presents itself. She is very angry at the world, whereas Grimm is angry at himself, and that hurts so much. And there were so many moments in this book that I just hurt for Grimm, and that's all kind of taking place in the background because that's not the main plot of this book. We have an antagonist who has pulled Blackthorn and Grimm to this castle in the middle of the woods where there are fae and fairies and myths afoot. And that's the main crux of this story, trying to figure out how Blackthorn and Grimm are going to navigate this pretty awful antagonist. But then there were also moments where I felt a glimmer of sympathy for this truly awful antagonist. So I think Marillier does an amazing job with character depiction. And yes, this was an amazing read. 5 stars. Would highly recommend picking up the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy if you're looking for something that is inspired by Irish folklore and myth and really dives deep into character exploration and humanity and the aftermath of confinement and assault and murder and grief. It's a very heavy book, but it is one that I absolutely loved, adored, and I can't wait to pick up the final installment of this trilogy, Den of Wolves. Jumping back a little bit to another middling read, I also finished The Wren in the Holly Library by K.A. Linde, and I think I gave this a 2.5. I wrote a bunch of reviews last week and I was feeling quite blunt and to the point, and I didn't hate or dislike The Wren in the Holly Library, but I was largely indifferent to it whilst I was reading it. I didn't really connect with the characters, and I'm someone that needs to really connect with my characters to deeply fall in love with a book and to escape within its pages. As you might be able to tell from how I've spoken about The Black Company and Tower of Thorns, that really plays into how I enjoy and experience a book. So I didn't love our characters within the Wren in the Holly Library. And I also found it to be so similar to The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. Both of those books take place in a paranormal, dystopian-esque world where there is like a seedy underground that our main female protagonist has learned to navigate and excel at being a bit of a thief. There is this treaty or agreement that rules above ground, and our female protagonist meets a much older male protagonist in a mentor-like role. They have a bit of a forbidden romance in the sense that they shouldn't give in to their feelings, but then they do. And there were so many similarities. When I was reading The Wren in the Holly Library, I just kept thinking about The Bone Season, even though The Bone Season takes place farther into the future in London, and Wren takes place a little bit closer to our modern day in New York City. And I just enjoyed The Bone Season more because I connected with the characters. I did really enjoy the friendship aspect that Linde injected into Wren, but that was very much on the foreground. We didn't get to see that friendship trio interact much. And I didn't buy into the romance. It felt very insta-lust. Did not get any type of love from it. It was just lust, and it was very abrupt in my opinion. So I didn't buy into the romance. I didn't really care for our characters. I found the world to be interesting. I'm a little bit intrigued, and there are the hints of potentially a love triangle developing in the next book, which is The Robin on the Oak Throne, which just isn't my cup of tea. I'm not really interested in that. And I was just largely left feeling a little bit disappointed because I wanted to love this book so much, with it being a Beauty and the Beast retelling and just the imagery of a Wren. My first D&D character was named Wren, and the sequel has Robin in the title, and there's that Robin imagery, and I have a Robin tattooed on my thigh. Like, there were so many aspects that I wanted to fall in love with, and I just didn't really. And I'm not sure that I'll be picking up the sequel. So 2.5, maybe 3-star read if I'm feeling generous, although I have already written my review and marked it as a 2.5 read on Storygraph and Goodreads. So it just wasn't for me, unfortunately, but I did tick it off of my TBR, which I'm quite proud of. Next, I read Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson, and this is a YA fantasy enemies to lovers story, and I really enjoyed it. I think I gave this book 4 stars, and I will say that I found the setup in the beginning to be a little bit clunky. This is a slower paced book, and I've been reading a lot of medium to fast paced books, so it took me a while to adjust to that pace and also to the fact that it is YA. However, this book takes place within a world that is already established in Pearson's previous series, The Remnant Chronicles. And I think the target audience for Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves is going to be Remnant Chronicles readers and fans, because I found the world building throughout Dance of Thieves to be a little bit clunky. There was so much thrown at you right from the get-go that I was quite lost, and eventually I found my feet, and I have actually finished this duology now, and I enjoyed it, and I do think it can stand as a standalone duology. Obviously that's what it is marketed as, but I don't think it is as strong of a standalone duology as it could be, just because Pearson really feels as if she's writing for those Remnant Chronicles fans. And I have not read the Remnant Chronicles, so the world building took a little bit getting used to and getting acclimatized. Once I was in there, I did enjoy it. I liked the repertoire between our 2 characters. it does move quite fast. It was a little bit of insta love. There wasn't so much enemies before they progressed to lovers, but it is a duology and it is YA. So I can kind of understand why that moved so quickly. And unlike Wren in the Holly Library, I did feel the attraction between our two characters. I bought into it, and there was a little bit of tension, a little bit of the we shouldn't do this, and then they gave in, obviously. But I did really enjoy the antagonist that was introduced in this book. I liked how our characters worked through things, and Dance of Thieves does end really beautifully. It ends on a really great note, and then Vow of Thieves picks up and sucker punches you. So I really did enjoy this duology as a whole. I would say I enjoyed the conclusion more than the introduction, but I still gave Dance of Thieves 4 stars, and I'm so glad that I finally picked it up. Finally, the last book that I have read off of my spring TBR/MBR, at least so far, is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. And this was another 5-star read. I absolutely adored this book, and I adored the conclusion to this duology. Even though I read this book with a pit in my stomach, wondering how Ross was going to end things here, because I think Ross did a really great job for depicting wartime to a young adult fantasy audience. There is such grief, such tension taking place across the pages of wondering how our characters are going to come back together and how and in what way. I think Ross did a great job. I did find this duology to be very similar to her Elements of Cadence series, just with how our characters interacted, how they came together, how they were pulled apart, and then how they came back together in the second book. Like, the plot beats between the two duologies were very similar in terms of where the first book ended and where the second book began. But in Ruthless Vows, I really loved what Ross did with the characters. There's a particular character at the end of Divine Rivals who I loathed, and I did not expect to grow to care for him throughout Ruthless Vows, and yet I did. Again, it all comes down to characters for me when I'm reading a book and if I'm enjoying a book. And I think Ross did a beautiful job with her characters. She writes in such a beautiful way. There's so much beautiful, gorgeous depictions and descriptions within her books that this one was a great one. Even though I did read it with that pit in my stomach, just wondering how it was going to conclude. And I did cry a whole lot at the conclusion, but it was a beautiful conclusion. I will say that there are heavy themes of grief and loss throughout this duology, and I found it a little bit difficult to read at times myself. I found there to be a handful of parallels between Iris's grief journey and my grief journey. Iris dreams a lot about her mother in Divine Rivals, who she has lost, and that is a way that my grief has manifested over the last couple of years. So I found those passages to be hard to get through, but beautiful with the humanity that Ross is injecting into this fantastical world. So it was a 5-star read. I would greatly recommend this series if you are looking for a mythical take on 1940s wartime. If you enjoy epistolary books, this was a great duology that takes place largely throughout letters back and forth between our two main characters. And yes, I absolutely adored this series. I'm so happy that I have read it, and I'm really looking forward to Ross's new book that's coming out this summer or fall, I think, which is called Wild Reverence. I just found out about it and I'm really looking forward to that one. And then actually the last book that I'm going to talk about today is actually the one that I'm currently reading, and that is A Fragile Enchantment by Alison Saft. And I am absolutely loving this book. Like, this has the makings of a strong 4-star, potentially 4.5 or higher. And I'm not properly annotating it, but I am putting little tabs in, if I can find any that I have here. Yeah, I'm just marking little tabs with little notes. There are very strong parallels with this mythical, fantastical setting between Ireland and England. Our main character is Macklish, which is essentially Irish, and they have been treated pretty awfully by the Avlish, who are the English in this fantasy realm, because the Avlish basically stood by whilst a famine wrecked through the Macklish population and a whole lot of people died or migrated. The Macklish make up the working class, the servants within these posh Avlish homes. And our main character, Neve, has been brought over to Avland to become the royal tailor for the youngest prince's wedding. And it is between Neve and Kit, the young prince, that our relationship is developing, that they are catching feelings for one another. But I am super intrigued by the parallels that Saft is creating between Ireland and England within this fantasy book. That's honestly what most of my little tabs are about. I took a Celtic literatures course in university, and this book is actually making me want to take down those old textbooks and like flip through and draw those parallels and draw those comparisons and make an analysis using this young adult fantasy book as the base. I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying our magic system, and I'm enjoying that our magic system has a direct cost on the user. I'm really interested to see how Saft develops that further. And yeah, I'm only halfway through, but I'm loving it. This also takes place in a Regency-esque setting, and Regency era is such a comfort era for me, and I love when there is a more fantastical take on it. This is giving me similar vibes to A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher or Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, especially Half a Soul, because within Half a Soul we have a seamstress character who has a magical ability and imparts a little bit of her soul in each piece that she creates, and she can create and weave these kind of spells in her garments, which is what Neve does in A Fragile Enchantment. But yes, I'm probably going to finish this up this weekend, hopefully. I do have my little niece with me since my brother and sister-in-law are in the hospital, but I'm sure that we will have some story time and I'll be able to finish this book soon. But that means I have finished 5 out of the 15 books I had set out to read this spring. And I do think it is feasible for me to finish reading the other books on my Spring MBR, which are just over my shoulder there, but only if I stop taking books out from the library, because during April and May, I have taken out at least 7 or 8 books from the library, and that has greatly impacted how much I've been able to read off of this MBR. But I'm truly calling it an MBR now, because these are my books which might be read this season, not necessarily the ones that I'm 100% going to read. I'm going to try and shake off some of that pressure and just enjoy what I'm reading, which I have been over the last several weeks. I have read so many great books, and I've had a lot of fun talking about them today. If you have read any of the books I've spoken about, or if you are interested in reading them now, please let me know down in a comment below, because I'd love to chat with you about them. for now, that is going to be it for me. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will be back soon with a new one. Bye for now.